12th October 1972.
A small chartered aircraft took off from Uruguay, South America. This aircraft was going to Santiago, the capital of Chile.
Carrying some rugby players tall and broad.
There were 45 passengers in total. Some of player family and friends had tagged along. This flight was not going to be long. Usually it takes only 3 hours to go from Uruguay to Santiago. But on the way, you came across the huge Andes Mountains. The Andes Mountains range in South America is the world's longest mountain range. Other than the Himalaya mountains, the highest mountains are found here.
These beautiful mountains becomes devastating for the passengers in our story. That day on 12th October, there was a storm in the mountains, because of which the plane could not keep flying.
The pilots then decided to stop midway and try to fly again the next day.
The plane landed in the Mendoza city of the Argentina for the night.
The next day on October 13th, the plane take off again at 2:18 pm. The pilots ensured that the weather had cleared up, so it was a smooth silencing flight for the next hour. At 3:21 pm, the pilot starts descending the plane. The plane was quite close to Santiago but was still in the mountains. Since there are high mountains right next to the city, while descending, suddenly there was a terrible turbulence. The plane started shaking horizontally. Around this time, clouds gathered up around the plane. Nothing was visible except the cloud. Suddenly, the alarm in the plane went off and the warning light began to flash. No one could understand why. The rugby players in the passengers went scared. They did not take this turbulence seriously. Amid jokes, a passenger looked out of the window and saw the cloud clearing up, but then he noticed that they were precisely close to the mountains. As soon as the aircraft moved out of the cloud, the pilot realized that they were moved towards the huge rock. Immediately in the panic, they tried to lift the plane up.
Pilots puts in maximum power to gaining the altitude to fly over the mountains safely, but unfortunately it was too late. The roar of the aircraft collided with the mountains while going up.
The 2 rows of seats at the back literally flew out of the plane. 3 passengers flew away with it and disappeared. The plane kept flying upward for a few more seconds, but then suddenly it starts fall down. After a few seconds, another collision happened. The left wing of the plane broken. Some more passengers flew out of the plane and fell down. Now only the front portion of the plane remained as it fell into a glacier. It slides down the glacier at the speed of 350 km per hour, and finally it crashed after dropping 700 meters.
Everything in the plane was destroyed.
The passenger seats were torn apart from the base of the plane. The cockpit of the plane was completely crushed.
And 2 pilots are immediately killed.
This aircraft lay broken on unknown mountains in Andes at a height of 3,570 meters. Surprisingly, out of 45 people on board, 33 were still alive. They had somehow survived this crash. The problem was that many of them were injured and no one knew where they were struck.
It was later found that this plane was 80 km off from its plane route.
And this painful story of survivals had just begun, friends.
Neither those people could have imagined at that time, nor you can imagine now. What happened to those survivors next? This is the heart-wrenching story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. Let's know about in this today's video.
In the Andes Mountains, 45 persons were aboard, given up for dead.
Survival fascinates people.
All of the passengers were given up for dead.
It became known as the miracle of the Andes.
Right after this crash, there were 2 survivors who were not seriously injured.
First 90-year-old Roberto Caneza and the other 20-year-old Gustavo Zerbino. Since both of them were medical students, they immediately start checking who was alive and how to help the injured.
They saw that many of passengers suffer from serious injuries.
One of them, 23-year-old Fernando Parado, who was in coma due to skull fracture. These 2 medical students tried their best to help the survivors. On the other hand, within an hour of the plane disappearance, the Chilean Air Search and Rescue Service a notification. 4 aircrafts were deployed to search for the survivors. They tried to find crash site for the dust till the night, but unfortunately they did not find anything. The rescue service officer concluded after hearing the radio transmission that the aircraft must have crashed in the remote and inaccessible area. The problem was that the aircraft was white in color and it had crashed in the place where there was white snow and ice all around. It was very difficult to locate it in the snowy mountains. On the night of 13th October, the remaining passengers were very hopeful.
They hoped that if they would somehow spend a night there and find a way to escape the cold, then someone would find them the next day.
5 injured passengers could not survive that snowy night. The number of survivors fell from 33 to 28.
These survivors used the remaining body of the plane as a shelter.
They used luggage, seat and snow to close the roar of the plane so that they could stay warm inside. The next day on 14th October, 11 different aircraft from Argentina, Chile and Uruguay were put into search operation. The search area they chose was correct. The location of the crash site was in that search area, but still they were not able to find the crash site. Survivors tried to use lipstick to write SOS on the plane roof.
They started writing yes,
but soon realized that they did not have enough lipstick to write all the letters. Then they tried to use suitcases to make a big cross in the snow so that search aircraft flying above could see them.
but soon they realized that this was not working.
That day they saw not one, not two, but 3 aircraft flying over them. They screamed, waved their hands and tried their best to make the aircraft notice them, but they were unsuccessful.
Another day passed in this attempt.
The next day, 15th October, the survivors realized that they need water to stay alive.
A passenger named Fito Stroch found a way to get water.
He used a metal sheet as a solar collector so that the sun ray could be concentrated to melt the snow, and he collect water droplet into empty wine bottles. Apart from this, many passengers used seat cushions like snowshoes, and the wool in the seat cover was used to protect from the cold.
The next day, on 16th October, 3 days after the crash, the Fernando Parado woke up his coma.
As soon as he regained consciousness, he saw that his mother passed away in the crash and his 9-year-old was severely injured. Parado tried his best to keep his sister alive. He brought food and water for her, but as the day went by, 8th day after the crash, his sister succumbed to her injuries.
Such accidents remind us how uncertain life is and how unpredictable it is. We don't know how long we will live. That's why it is said, live every moment.
Most of passengers were from coastal area. Before this, they had never seen snow, and now suddenly in the cold of minus 30 degrees Celsius. At such a high altitude without proper food and water, they were somehow surviving.
In these bad conditions, there is another problem, snow blindness.
When the ultraviolet rays of the sun reflect on the snow and ice in the mountains, it can damage your eyes. This is called the snow blindness. These survivors had only 3 pairs of sunglasses. On 21 October, 8 days after the crash, search and rescue team gave up. They believed that since they could not find any sign of the survivors in those 8 days,
there was no point into continuing the search operation. There was a little chance that anyone could have survived after so many days.
So after 142 hours of search operation, this search operation was officially stopped. Meanwhile, the survivors found a transistor radio among the seat of the aircraft.
A survivors rugby player, Roy Harley, was also an electronic enthusiast.
So he tried to switch on the radio. He made a long antenna by improvising, and because of his efforts, finally the radio starts working.
This radio communicates one way only. The survivors could hear things but could not send any message to the world.
They turned on the radio 11 days after the crash, and then they came to know that the search operation had been cancelled. Their hearts were completely broken. Some people started crying after hearing this news. Some people clasped their hands and started praying to the God.
That the world is alive and they consider you.
Fernando Parado was the only one who did not react much after hearing this news, because he was planning something else.
By the 11th day, survivors were running out of food. They did not have much to begin with. There were only 8 chocolate bars, 1 tin of mussels, 3 small jars of jam, a jar of almond, a box of peanuts, some dates and candies, dry plum, and a few of wine. A few days after the crash, they started rationing the food. They ate very little each day. Parado ate a chocolate-covered peanut for 3 days.
Just one peanut. But this type of rationing was not enough because the food was almost over. There were no trees or plant at on the altitude of 3,800 meters. Nor where there was an animal that could be killed and eaten.
By the 11th day, the food was completely gone, and some people tried to eat some part of the plane. They tried eating the cotton in the seats and the leather on the seat.
But this made them more sick. In such a situation, when there was no option other than starving to the death, these survivors did something that will shock you.
To stay alive, they decided there was no option other than eating dead bodies of their friends and family. It was not an easy decision to make because most of the people who were killed in the crash were friends, classmates, family members, or relatives. Since Caneza came up with this idea, he was the first to try it. Some other tried to, but they could not. They refused then. But 2 days later,
With no other option, finally even they choose to eat the human meat.
on 29th October, 16 days after the crash, this food source was also depleting rapidly for the survivors.
They had no plan of action. No one know what to do the next, and the situation could not have been worse.
But then that night, they heard a loud grumble. It turned out to be an avalanche. Large amount of snow descending so fast from the mountain top that it filled the broken plain with snow.
Eight people lost in the snow and suffocated.
Only 19 survivors remained.
These remaining 19 people were also trapped in the small space under the snow.
Roberto, you had it. You're going to die. That's it. A very nice sensation of heat between my legs because I was peeing on myself and saying, that's it.
Parado used a metal pole to make hole in the snow to allow some ventilation. After working hard for 2 days, they dug a tunnel under the snow, and with great difficulty, they managed to get the surface. As soon as they got out, they saw a snowstorm was coming, and it would be the prudent to go back into the snow cave to survive. For the next 3 days, the remaining survivors somehow managed to stay in the cramped space. 3 days later went back up to the surface and the weather was cleared. After coming out, the survivors realized that no one was coming to save them.
If they want to stay alive, they would need to put in the effort themselves. There was no point in sitting at the crash site waiting for the help. They need to try their best till the last breath. Caneza, Parado and Wissington were among the strongest survivors.
They decided together to give them more and warmest clothes, and they would try to walk around looking for help.
The first task was to estimate the location. Before the crash, the co-pilot had stated that their aircraft was passed through the Corico.
So they estimate that if they walked a few kilometers to the west, they would definitely reach some countryside area of Chile. But their estimation was extremely wrong.
Actually, the co-pilot did not know where he was taking to the plane.
In reality, their crash site was 89 km east in the middle of Andes Mountains.
Still unaware of this, they rested for a few days to build up the energy.
On November 15th, 33 days after the crash, these three people set out to find help. After traveling for hours towards the east, they found the roar piece of their aircraft. It was the part of the plane that had broken apart first. Inside it, they found many suitcases, box of chocolates, 3 meat patties, a bottle of rum, extra clothes, comic books, and some medicines.
And along with this, they found two-way radio system.
A radio that can not only facilitate incoming communication but can also send message. They decided to spend the night there.
The next day of the expectation, they walk a little further east, but after discussing if they believe that they should try to turn on the aircraft radio, they decided to get some batteries out of main body of the aircraft and then try to start the radio. But soon they realized that this was not working. They tried their best to start the radio for a few days, but soon realized that there was no other way to survive. How had he start walking westward?
On 11 December, 59 days after the crash, an avalanche hit. 3 more survivors were killed in it.
I was trapped completely by the snow in the avalanche, and it's the most deadly silence you may imagine. I couldn't move.
Only 16 remained.
To climb the mountain in the west, they need a way to sleep at night. How could they survive the cold night of minus 30 degrees Celsius?
Among the survivors was an 18-year-old boy, Carlos Miguel Rodriguez.
He remembered that his mother had teach him to sew with needle. He was carrying his needles and sewing kit with him.
His idea was to stitch different pieces of clothing to make a big sleeping bag.
With the insulation, you could make a sleeping bag. But I not only had the idea, I made it myself.
The next day, December 12, these three brave men, Parado, Caneza and Washington,
set out without any mountain gear to climb the glacier. Going westward means that they would have to climb the mountain first before going down.
They still believed that they were only a few kilometers away, so they hoped that they would find help by walking for 2 to 3 days.
So they packed a 3-day supply of meat.
Skill without any training. You're like a child when you are confronted with a snow slope. You try to go straight up, you might be using your hands and your feet, you're slipping, you're sliding, and for every step that you go up, you slide back a half a step.
To protect himself against the cold, Parado wore 3 pairs of jeans. He was also wearing 3 sweaters on top of his t-shirt and 4 pairs of socks on his feet. He was also wearing a plastic shopping bag over the socks. The cold was so bad.
They had no technical gear, no map and no compass and no any climbing experience.
And at this height the air gets quite thin and one starts feeling the lack of oxygen. But despite that, they kept moving forward towards the mountains. The sleeping bag they had stitched was useful at night. During the day they kept moving forward, taking slow steps. The 3 of them in that one sleeping bag slept as close to each other as possible. As soon as the sun rose, they started walking. Gradually they kept moving forward together. The second day, the third day, and the morning of the 4th day, they realized that their estimation was grossly wrong. Ahead they could see no end to their journey because they had little to no food. Washington decided to return to crash site and only the other 2 would go ahead, so that less food was needed.
On 15th December, Washington starts going back,
which was easier because it was all downhill. He used a aircraft sheet as a sleigh and within an hour he reached the crash site.
It took 3 days to climb the mountain, but in the just 1 hour he was at the crash site.
Parado and Caneza kept climbing the mountains. After 3 hours, they reached the peak of the mountain and saw that all around them there was only mountains as far as they could see. There was nothing except the snowy mountains.
I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think because what we saw was horrible. Instead of green valleys, we saw mountains and snow-covered peaks 360 degrees around us, to the horizon all around us.
With great difficulty, Parado tried to find something else to see. On the far western horizon, they saw two mountain peaks without snow.
They assumed that they should keep traveling in that direction. They could not give up.
Parado and Caneza keep hiking for many days. Finally, they reach a valley where they could see a river flowing. In this situation, reach the river was a great relief.
Because while traveling downstream the river, it was easy to find downhill path. They kept walking and finally trekking for 9 days. On 20th December,
They could find some presence of humans. They could see some cows in the fields. They were so tired by this point that they could not walk further. Right then, on the other side of the river, they saw three men on horse.
And Roberto said, "Look, Nando, a man on a horse."
Parado tried to shout, but the river was so loud that those people could not hear him. But by chance, one of them spotted Parado and Caneza. He looked at them and shouted back, "Tomorrow."
he said that he would be back the next day. The next day, the man come back on horse.
And this time brought some papers and pencil with him. He attached the paper and pencil to the stone with the thread and threw it to the other side of the river.
For the first time, Parado had the opportunity to send his message to the world. Parado wrote in Spanish on the paper,
"I came from the plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. I have 100 friends up there. In the plane there are still 40 injured people. We have to get out from there quickly and we don't know how. We don't have any food. We are weak. When are you going to come to fetch us? Please, we can't even walk."
On the other hand, the person who received this message was a farmer from Chile.
Sergio Catalan. He read this note and told him gestures that he understood.
After talking to his two friends, it turned out that they did remember vaguely. A few months ago, they heard on the news that a plane crashed. And when those friends realized this, they were shocked. They could not believe that there were survivors of a 2-month-old plane crash.
Sergio threw a piece of bread to the other side of the river.
For the next 10 hours on horse, he rode towards the west. They were still so far from any village and human settlement. Finally, when he reached the nearest city, the army commander was informed about this, and he contacted the army headquarters in Santiago.
Meanwhile, the farmer brought Parado and Caneza to Los Maintenance city on horse,
where they finally get some rest. It was found that on sheer will,
they had hiked 61 km on foot over the last 10 days.
Caneza lost up his half of body weight. He weighed only 44 kg then.
As soon as other people got to know about their story, it becomes international news.
This heart-wrenching story was truly unbelievable.
The Chilean Air Force sent 3 helicopters to immediately rescue the survivors. Army officer interviewed Parado and Caneza to get information about the location.
Army officers took him with them on the helicopter to locate the crash site. With the Parado's help, the location of the remaining survivors was finally discovered by the army commanders. On 22 December 1972,
70 days after the crash, 2 search and rescue helicopters finally reached the survivors to save their lives. In total, 16 survivors were rescued.
this story is a lesson to the world about hope. If you have decided to do something and you have patience and humanity, then nothing is impossible. If you want, you can achieve things that you can never even dream of.